Hi there, everybody, and thank you very much for attending Tony's Tech Talks. These are monthly talks where you guys get to set the agenda and you vote on the topics that we're going to discuss in these 15-minute presentations. Now, I suppose the focus of these presentations is to give you a sense of what's under the bonnet, so to speak, on the Kantan platform. So there was 3 topics sent out, and one of which received 4 votes, which means that's the one I'm going to talk about today, and that is how do you choose the best translation memories for machine learning or for building statistical and now, I suppose, neural MT. And I'm going to be a bit cheeky today, because what I'm also going to show you guys as well, since we've such a big audience, I'm actually going to show you, I'll give you a sneak preview of what's coming down the line. We're about to launch a brand new interface into the Kantan environment, and if you look at the screen at the moment, you'll get a sneak preview of what this environment is. Now, of course, this is the first time we've shown it publicly, so it is a preview of the platform. We're in final QA on this. In fact, it's going into full regression and functionality testing this week and next week. And we've been using this platform ourselves internally for the best part of the last 2 months. In fact, we switched over to this platform internally in, I think it was early March of this year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about translation memories and how they relate to machine learning and what is the connection between translation memories and machine learning, and show you how to do this in the new user interface. Now, I do hope I don't confuse you, because you're obviously used to using our existing interface, but you'll see in this new interface we've kept a lot of things the same, and we did that so that there's only a small learning curve for our clients when they switch over to this more modern, super fast interface. So anyway, so let's talk about translation memory. So first of all, let's answer the easy question: how do you select translation data to train an engine? Okay, so the first thing you do is you select your engine. Obviously, I've selected an engine here called Library ENFR. The next thing you need to do, as you did before, is you click on the Training Data tab, and this is where you're going to start uploading and using your data. Now, there are a number of different types of training data that we support, the first of which is our own translation memory data, okay, and that's called the Kantan library feature, and you'll see this in the new user interface and the old interface. And when you select that interface, what you're presented with is a full collection of all of the data that we have spent the last 2 to 3 years cleaning and cleansing and getting it ready for machine translation learning. Now, all of this data, I will admit, is publicly available today. It's none of our client data makes it into these lists. It's all publicly available data. Some of the data has come from European sources. Some has come from Taos. We've purchased some of the Taos data, and we've also purchased some third-party data as well. All available free as part of your monthly subscription. So, for instance, in this example here, because I'm building an English to French engine, only the English-French data sets appear on the screen for me. And you can see there that I have an automotive engine. I have a dictionary engine, which is pretty cool. I'll come back to that now in a second. I have a financial. I have 2 general engines. I have about 4 or 5 legal engines. And each of those engines, by the way, are bi-directional. So you can see that the little sign there says that you can switch. And you can see now that if you hover over the data, or the actual engine, we tell you the word count for the source and target. So none of these engines are small guys. They're pretty large engines. We've got a medical engine, some patent engines, quite a lot of patent engines actually that you can choose from, a lot of technical engines, and then United Nations. So you can see there that we must have at least 20 data sets that you can use to choose suitable data for machine learning. Now, we're very excited about these new additions, which are called dictionaries. Now, these dictionaries, believe it, are based on the IATA dictionary and data sets from the European Union, and they're absolutely vast. We have taken the best of those dictionaries in 26 different languages and given you all of the interlinguas for those languages. And what you can do now is you can throw in or include a dictionary translation memory in your file. Now, these dictionaries, by the way, are ginormous. So that current dictionary at the moment contains, let me just hover over and see how much data it contains. It contains 11 million words of source data, and 8.9 million words of target data. So that's an absolutely enormous data. Now, I know I've used this English-French dictionary before, and it contains approximately 300,000 to 400,000 unique terms. So if you are building an engine for one of your clients, and you're noticing that the engine doesn't really have a large vocabulary in English, French, or any other European, 26 languages and European languages, what you might do is just simply include that dictionary file in your engine, and that will substantially boost and increase the performance of that engine in terms of translation output. Now, you can also select other engines, so I've selected the automotive engine there, and you can see, guys, as I start adding these engines in, you see the word count over here starts to change, so you can get a sense of how much data you're actually adding in to your engine, which is pretty cool, it has to be said. So I know how big my engine's becoming. So now with these 4 or 5 translation memories included, I've 68 million words of data going into my engine. So that's one of the first things you can do. And what's pretty cool about that, guys, is obviously that data comes completely free as part of your Kantan monthly subscription. Now, in total, we have approximately, I think it's slightly over 10 billion words of data available in the Kantan library function, and that is changing on a monthly, if not even weekly basis. So always check back in to see what's new in library. And by the way, if you want to know what's a new library, simply click the library, and you can see that we have this little new symbol appears adjacent to the engine. That tells us that we've just recently added that in within the last couple of weeks. In fact, those dictionary files were only launched about 3 to 4 weeks ago for use worldwide by our clients. So that's the first thing you can do in terms of translation memory. Now, because you're using our dictionary files, or our library files rather, which include those dictionaries, you might also want to upload some of your own training data, and that's very simple to do. You just simply drag and drop the data onto this control. As before, it's exactly the same functionality. But there's one thing that you should note. If you're including, say, 50 million words of our Kantan library data, the potential for our data to swamp your training data is very high. So if we have 50 million words of, say, a dictionary file plus, say, some legal data in there, you may only have maybe 1 or 2 million words of your own data. And in order to influence the engine to select your data during translation rather than our data, in other words, to impact the fluency of the output and the style of the translation output, you might consider actually uploading maybe 2 or 3 copies of your training data into your engine. And what that actually does, guys, is it boosts the selectability of your data in preference to our Kantan library data. And that's what's known as engine adaptation. In other words, you're adapting the engine to have a preference for your translation memory above and beyond the Kantan library translation data. So in other words, the Kantan library should really only be used as a baseline translation if there is a better translation available or a better phrase available in your data, your translation memory data or your training data. It should choose that instead. And the simplest way we created to help you do that is to simply duplicate or triplicate your training data. Now, there is a proviso here, guys. It's a little technique that we've used very successfully with our clients. Make sure that each copy of your training data has a unique file name, because obviously if you give us the same file name 3 times, it's still just one file name when it goes onto our servers. So if you have mydata.tmx and you want to triplicate that or duplicate that, give me a file called mydata01.tmx, mydata02.tmx, and so on. Just make the names unique, and that's all you need to do to boost the prevalence of your data in the data model. So that's 2 ways of getting data. You can use our Kantan library, or you can use our your own data. Now, of course, there is a 3rd type of data that's very important when you're training an engine. Oh, by the way, let me just step back a second. By uploading or selecting Kantan library and uploading your own data, that is applicable to both building a neural MT engine as well as a statistical MT engine. Okay, so there's no change in the training process. It's irrespective of what engine type you chose. So if I was building a neural MT engine, I would go through the same selection process for selecting my translation memory data. I would still use Kantan library as my baseline data, and of course I would still use my own data to adapt the engine to my translation style. There is one thing of major difference between neural training data and statistical training data, and that is, of course, that for statistical machines, statistical training purposes, we do like to see you upload monolingual data in the target language. So because my engine here is English to French, I would obviously like you to upload some monolingual data that's in domain and available to upload. You can simply upload it as a text file, it can be a docx file, a PDF file, even an Adobe Illustrator file and IDML file. Like, there's loads of file formats that you can upload data for. And monolingual data will only be used to influence the output of a statistical engine. We don't use the monolingual data when you're building your Kantan neural engines. In fact, we actually ignore monolingual data when we're building the neural engines. Now, the other thing the other type of training data, the fourth type of training data that you can upload at this stage is, of course, your terminology. Now, terminology is incredibly important both for statistical engines and neural engines. In fact, it is probably one of the most important files you're going to upload into your engine because it has a significant and immediate impact on the terminology that the engine will use. Okay. Now, we've got loads of ways of uploading terminology files into your engine. One way of doing it is to just upload a TBX file and drag it onto this control and drop it. That will actually upload it. Or alternatively, and you would not be surprised how many of our clients do this, they maintain their terminology lists in spreadsheets. So to upload a terminology list, or a dictionary or a glossary as we call them here, you simply create a spreadsheet where row A, or column A rather, contains the source text and column B contains the target text. And as long as you give that a name of terminology or glossary.xls, we will detect that file automatically and give it a suitable preference when we're building both a neural engine and a statistical engine. So that's the fourth type of training data. So to summarize there, you can use Kantan library, which contains billions of words of very high quality machine learning applicable text. You can adapt the engine using your own translation memory, and you might consider boosting the prevalence of your data by just duplicating or triplicating it when you're uploading it. You can then upload terminology data as a TBX file or as an Excel spreadsheet. And then, of course, if you're building statistical engines, don't be afraid of uploading monolingual data. So there's your four types of training data. Now, there is a caveat here, guys. Make sure all of your data comes from a relatively close domain. So, for instance, if you're building a medical engine, there's probably no advantage in uploading a translation memory from the financial domain, or maybe a news feed domain, or maybe a technical domain. Generally speaking, you should keep the data in domain as much as possible. The reason for that is because in-domain engines will always outperform broad generic-based engines. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. If you train an engine, say a medical engine, with medical terminology, with medical style, with medical fluency in terms of how we create the target languages, and you upload medical data, that monolingual medical data, the engine will start to veer towards that translation style, will certainly start to use those terminology and the terminology list that you provide, and overall that will produce higher quality output with less post-editing requirements. Now, the reason we know this, and it's been tracked over numerous industry test projects and evaluations, is that one of the top problems that needs to be fixed during post-editing using generic engines is one of terminology. So if you keep your engine in domain with suitable and relevant training data with in-domain terminology lists, you will find that fixing terminology becomes less of a burden, and if you achieve that, post-editing will progress much more rapidly. Now, one other thing about training data that I just want to say in closing is that quantity versus quality. Do we want lots of training data, or do we want high quality training data? Well, we really have to focus on the quality of the training data, not necessarily the quantity. Okay? So when you're building an engine, we generally give you a number of automated scores that will tell you how good the engine will perform. And one in that, and that's called build analytics. Now, one of the key things to watch for when you're building an engine, I'm just going back to the mainstream here, and I'm going to click on build analytics here, because one of the really important numerical values that should be looked at all the time in your engines is, we'll ignore blue and F measure and tear here. You kind of understand what those scores are here. But what you want to look for here is the unique word count. Now that is such an important number. The unique word count calculates how many unique words your engine actually understands or can handle or can translate from into the target language. So if you have an engine that has 10 million bilingual words but only 5,000 unique words, even though the total word count is 10 million, which is a big number, because the unique word count in that engine is so small, that engine most likely will produce very poor results. So you really need to focus on this unique word count, and you see this number all the time in our Kantan analytics. In fact, even if you look at timeline, if you look at the timeline for a particular engine, every time you do a build for a particular engine in timeline, you'll see that we actually display the unique word count in your timeline graphs as well. Such is the importance of that number. So what sort of number unique word count should you be looking for in your training data? Well, we would look for anything between 600,000 unique words all the way up to 1.2 to 1.3 million unique words. So if you keep that in the back of your mind, that's the type of unique word count that you should be aiming for to achieve optimal performance and optimal quality for both statistical and neural-based MT. Now, I think I've touched on all the important parts of that today. Thank you very much for your attention. We're bang on the 20 minutes. I always like to keep these talks down to 20 minutes. I hope this information was useful, and I hope you enjoyed having a quick sneak preview. You're the first people to see this outside of this organization, of the new interface into KantanMT. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to talking to you all during our next presentation next month. Take care. All the best.